Today we'll be visiting with Bruce Allen in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Bruce is a social worker in private practice who does private counseling, supervision, consultation, and training, and has been active in the William Glazer Institute since its certification in 1987. Bruce has also held a clinical professorship at the University of Arkansas School of Social Work.
Hello, Ken. Thank you.
In your years of practice and teaching, what have you found to be the most enduring and helpful components of Dr. Glazer's work?
Glazer's basic philosophy is that we can all help ourselves, no matter what happens to us, no matter what anyone else has done or what has occurred in our history. It's a natural state for us to self-evaluate and to continually develop strategies to meet our needs. This idea is very empowering for us and our clients. You know, in school we were always taught to start where the client is, and then often taught to focus on diagnosing them. And this approach has always been a little bit different and a bit more hopeful to people that we are working with. When we focus on how others are to blame for our angst and our life condition, or the past is responsible for our life condition, although certainly we collect information from these sources, and at certain times in our life we were young enough to not really be able to evaluate the information and the experience all that well, that we really always have a chance to do better today. You know, with this philosophy, we understand that complaining is generally not useful unless we can somehow understand what our discontent means, and from this knowledge we can revise our strategy for getting what we need.
What first attracted you to Dr. Glazer?
Well, what attracted me to Dr. Glazer, initially I worked with what I would consider hardcore heroin addicts in downtown Houston. Most of these folks were parolees or otherwise involved with the law. Hardly any of these guys had any idea about how to talk about their feelings and their family of origin dynamics, which is what I basically was being trained to do in school. And I'd hoped they were going to be able to do that. Their behavior was powerful, though, and working on choices they made every day was key to helping them clarify what else they might want in their lives other than the history that they'd had. It was just a very pragmatic, here and now approach that seemed to work when nothing else really did for me.
Tell us about your favorite conversation with the man.
My favorite conversation with the man. Well, it probably was a time when I had brought him to Little Rock, and we had lunch together, and we discussed a book that he was planning on choice theory and health. I was very excited about this. It seemed that it really was an approach that covered a lot, mental health and physical health and all. I guess it's my favorite because I really like the idea. I really look forward to the book, and it's still yet to be written. And I think with new information that we have about brain science, that now even the layperson is beginning to understand, that there still is a time for a book on health, using the total behavior concept and what that all means today. So I think that's my favorite conversation because it lingers in my mind as something that is a part of our future.
In your time in the academic world, what were your students looking for in your classes?
Well, teaching at the university, as I did, the students I found were always keenly interested in what they could use with their clients today. By the time I got social work students, they were either senior undergraduates or most typically graduates. Although of course the academics was essential to forming how they learn to be a helping professional. So much of academia is quite theoretical at a time when the students are being asked to practice in internship settings for the first time. As a clinical professor, I had the latitude to turn a question into a role play and to demonstrate various strategies for talking to people in need. It has always amazed me that so many professional schools do not really deal directly with what you might actually say to a person, and this was always of keen interest to my students. Typically, the Glazer approach was seen as very pragmatic and something that could be used almost immediately.
Were your presentations of Dr. Glazer's material well received?
My presentation of Glazer's ideas, and of course, were certainly very well received. What made them popular was just primarily because some of these ideas could be used immediately. The other thing is, I think that it challenged them, students, in a way that also suggested that what was good for their clients also might be good for them as well.
I know you have a broad range of interests that have helped you help others. Tell us how Dr. Glazer's work fits in with some of the other disciplines you've studied.
Other disciplines? Well, I guess I've been a student of many different approaches to therapy, and of course this gets into philosophy, psychology. I began really as a truly eclectic therapist, so it's not really popular to say that anymore. Now we're integrated, but over the years, choice theory, I would say, has become an organizing principle for a lot of what I know about helping. I find that other theories and therapies often echo these principles, but don't have the quite specific emphasis on self-evaluation and choice that I find particularly useful. So although I might use other terms and other understandings in my work, and as I talk about my work, and as I've had the opportunity to teach about it, I think that there are so many things that are consistent with choice theory, and as Glazer said, if they work, you can explain it with choice theory, and I really believe that's true.
Through the years, you have seen many people come through the Institute's training programs. Can you tell us some of the highlights of the benefits folks have gotten through this training?
Well, highlights, benefits folks have gained. I remember I was training once near Chapel Hill, North Carolina. With a lot of people in the field of education. There was one teacher in particular. She was very bubbly. She was very outgoing, and she was an expert in her classroom at rewarding and punishing behavior. And her method, in her mind, seemed airtight. Initially, I felt two ways about this. I really wanted to honor her, and I really wanted to challenge her. But during the training, she started listening to what we were talking about in terms of relationships and self-determination and control. And at some point, she really broke down and admitted that even though in many ways her very strict behavioral approach was effective, that she often felt that her methods had done little to promote individual growth and hadn't done a whole lot to promote better relationships with others outside of people learning to follow the rules, which they certainly had in her classroom. It was a truly profound insight for her, along with a lot of hope that she could teach her students to self-evaluate and have greater connections with her and each other. That incident stays with me. It was pretty emotionally charged for everyone involved.
As a mental health professional, what have been some of the experiences you've had helping others with Dr. Glazer's work?
Experiences helping others. I really picked up reality therapy in that first job back in 19 75, and so I've used it to some degree since that time. But and the influence of Glazer has left me less focused on what other pathology my clients have brought to the table and more on their strengths and capabilities to become self-reflective and understand that much of their distress could be alleviated by working to more effectively meet their needs. I was somewhat of a topic of curiosity working in a psychiatric hospital, having conversations with people who were actively psychotic, and I began to make sense of what they were saying by listening to the themes and their somewhat chaotic verbal, but not completely chaotic verbalizations. The nursing staff would joke and offer me a bed since I seemed to know what these folks were talking about. And when to everyone else they made no sense at all. And I rarely ever directly challenged their thinking, but I just about this directly, and yet was somewhat of a subversive, I suppose, which I like to be in terms of actually communicating with people who folks believe that perhaps there was no end and no positive end to be had in communicating with them. And I was pretty proud of this. I really feel I feel like that Glazer's influence helped me to be able to do this and understand that when you read Reality Therapy, and he talked about engaging with people who had been given up on, this was something I really particularly appreciated being able to do.
When people come to you for help, what do they want? Has choice theory and reality therapy helped you zero in, so to speak, on people's real needs?
Well, the question about whether my knowledge of reality therapy and choice theory has helped me to zero in on people's needs, I think this is one of the things that I really looked for, particularly early in my career. I saw a lot of master therapists who toured and would select clients from the community, probably from therapists in their training program, and would do live therapy on the stage, which, of course, we've sort of considered suspect. But the thing that impressed me with the master therapists was how they seemed to be able to get to the core issues in a fairly short period of time. So it's something that when I was trying to develop a model of therapy was very important to me. So many people wanted for me to teach them how to change the people around them or take away the misery of their symptoms. These are very common reasons to come to therapy. But when the conversation turns to their most significant relationships, and I help them begin to refocus on what their hopes are, they often feel empowered to affect change in their life. Sometimes they're befuddled that we haven't talked more about their symptoms, but helping them understand that most of us have various symptoms that tell us something about how we're not getting what we need from the people that are closest to us. I love Glazer's statement in a role play, a few years ago. Well, since you're the only one here, it might be best to talk about you. Is something that I keep in mind when people try to enlist me to help them figure out how to change their spouse.
If someone were to ask you about joining the William Glazer Institute, what would you tell them about the benefits to themselves as well as to their work?
Well, benefits of the William Glazer Institute. An organization is as good as the values and the ideas behind it and the actions of the people involved. If Glazer's ideas and approach are helpful to you, the organization is a way to formalize through certification and instructor programs, conferences, etc. Joining helps to further the ideas and makes one part of something larger that helps to keep the ideas current and relevant. The Institute has gone through a complete overhaul over the last 2 years, and although some of the players are the same, the ideas are the same, the training structure is maintained, there's no longer a legal board that is separate from an advisory board. They're no longer a group of 2 or 3 people who really are making all the decisions. Members of this new board and directors, and now with new executive director Kim Olver, new ideas are abundant. The international scope of the Institute is pretty phenomenal, and noticing how these ideas span time, geography, and culture gives testimony to the power of these ideas for helping others reach their potential. Being part of this always reminds me that I can always do better to meet my own potential as well, because certainly sometimes I need reminding of that.
You've been in the Institute for a while. You've come up through the ranks to senior faculty. How would you describe the benefits you have received by remaining with the Institute all these years?
Benefits for remaining with the organization for all these years. I think so much of that is about relationships. I'm typically not a joiner to a particular approach, philosophy. I study many approaches and theories, and I've taught many perspectives. My 15 years as a university instructor and then as a clinical professor. I'm hardly one way about anything. No matter how much I learn, Glazer's work is still compelling to me. My greatest reward for extending my time and moving through the faculty process was again and again having the opportunity to deepen my understanding and have periods of time in which the purpose is to delve into the ideas and their applications. I mean, the faculty meetings, the trainings, the retreats, and this sort of thing. Folks in the Institute have the kind of background to engage in the kind of discussion that I find most satisfying about this kind of thing.
In helping others, there must be 1 or 2 situations that stand out in your memory as highlights. Can you tell us about them?
Situations that stand out, and I've got a couple of them. I think that when I was a clinical professor at the university, students heard lots of stories about my clients. But I think a situation that stands out to me. One of them is I had a client once who people called borderline, and most people try to stay away from her. She was often homicidal and suicidal, injured herself on a regular basis, and was quite a challenge. She helped me learn how to be confrontive with someone who seemed so fragile that she might think of one of us dying if I pushed her too hard. So you could feel the grip of the dynamic of this person. And I knew, too, that if I just coddled her, that wouldn't be helpful either. So I framed a confrontation to her one day. So caring, so understanding, I tried to be. And she looked at me and she said, you seem so caring, you seem so kind, you seem so understanding as you say that, but I've never been more nailed to the wall. And I felt that I had arrived and mastered the art of confrontation, and realized that it was Glazer, it was reality therapy that really helped me to realize that, number one, this really needed to happen, and number two, confrontation was not a dirty word. It was not an unkind thing. It involved finding questions to probe the choices this person was making, and the questions were formed with the belief that she could do better, and I think she realized that. And the last time I had seen her, she hadn't been hospitalized in a couple of years after basically visiting the state hospital 5 to 6 times a year before that. So, at any rate, I think it was very helpful. Another client that comes to mind very early on, when I just started reading reality therapy. I was in my early 20s, working in a drug addiction program that I mentioned in downtown Houston. I got a new client, a 72-year-old man who had spent 35 of his years in prison. And his first addiction was to paregoric. So that's how old of an addict he is. But not really having a clue as to what to say, since I was about 24 at the time, I said, well, what do you want now? Not realizing later that would be such a pertinent question in so many of my sessions. But I was quite amazed when he said very clearly, peace of mind. Now, this began a great discussion about what he valued in his life and what peace of mind could really meant to him. And he thought that perhaps the way that I could help him was to help him find a way to get back to prison, because he thought he would probably be better off. He said, I'm old. Nobody messes with me. They come to me for advice. I have enough food to eat. I never have to worry about paying bills or where I'm going to sleep. Got pretty good friends. Nobody hurts me there. I'm well taken care of. I realized that day in a very powerful way that whatever I thought was good for somebody was only a reflection of my own life and my own values. And I was much better off asking them and listening to what they wanted for themselves and helping them find the best way to go about getting it.
What would you like our audience to take away with them from this conversation?
Well, what I'd hope what people would take away from this conversation, I hope that folks would choose membership in the Institute, choose to be an active part of the dialogue about these great ideas. Glazer didn't make them all up. We could talk about choice theory and reality therapy and Socrates and Plato, but he has taken great knowledge and he has put it together in a model for life that people all over the world have found effective. Sometimes people come and go from the Institute for different reasons. I've elected to stay all this time since I began my certification training in 1985, and it's really something that's great to be a part of. So, thank you.
Folks, before we leave, I'd like you to know that Bruce is an accomplished guitarist and performer. I've enjoyed sitting in on some of his jam sessions. Thanks for taking this time to be with us, Bruce. I know I've learned a lot, and I think I can say that our audience has too.